Welcome, loremasters, to the shadowed halls of memory. The great tales of the First Age are often songs of glorious battle against the Dark Lord, Morgoth. But tonight, we speak of a darkness that rose not from Angband, but from the hearts of elves and dwarves. A tragedy born of beauty, greed, and blood. Our story begins in the aftermath of the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. Hope in Beleriand was a flickering ember, nearly extinguished. The great alliances lay shattered, and the shadow of Morgoth stretched long and cold across the land. It was in this age of despair that a new, internal poison began to fester, one that would rot the heart of the most ancient elven kingdom. The catalyst for this tragedy was a man, King Thingol, the greatest warrior of men. After decades of torment in the prisons of Angband, he was released by Morgoth, his heart filled with lies and his soul burdened by a potent curse. He wandered the broken lands, a specter of grief, until his path led him to the hidden borders of Doriath, the kingdom of King Thingol and Queen Melian. Hurin, believing Thingol had abandoned his family to their doom, did not come seeking aid. He came with bitterness. He cast at the feet of the Elven King a treasure of immense worth and sorrow, the Nauglamír, the necklace of the dwarves, which he had recovered from the ruins of the sacked city of Nargothrond. He declared it a fee for Thingol's care of his kin, his words dripping with venom planted by the Dark Lord. Melian the Maya, whose wisdom was as deep as the sea, saw through Morgoth's deceit. She spoke gently to Hurin, healing his mind of the lies that had poisoned it. Realizing the injustice of his rage, Hurin, now humbled, picked up the fabled necklace and formally presented it to Thingol. Then, his purpose fulfilled, he departed from the halls of Menegroth forever, leaving behind a treasure that would carry its own doom. And so, the Nauglamír, a masterpiece of the dwarves of the Blue Mountains, rested in the treasury of Doriath. But Thingol possessed another treasure, one far greater and more perilous. One of the three Silmarils, the hallowed jewels of Fëanor, recovered from Morgoth's crown by the hero Beren, his own son-in-law. A thought, both brilliant and terrible, began to form in the king's mind. He looked upon the Silmaril, whose light was the living memory of the two trees of Valinor, and he looked upon the Nauglamír, the pinnacle of dwarven craft, and in his heart a great desire was kindled, to unite them. He envisioned a single piece of jewelry that would hold the greatest work of the elves and the greatest work of the dwarves, a treasure unrivaled in all of Middle-earth. This was a task beyond the skill of his own elven smiths. And so, King Thingol sent word to the Blue Mountains, to the great dwarf city of Nogrod. He summoned their most renowned craftsmen, promising them a reward worthy of their reputation. The dwarves, ever eager to work with precious materials and earn great riches, answered the call and journeyed to the hidden kingdom. Within the Thousand Caves of Menegroth, a great smithy was prepared for them. There, the Dwarves of Nogrod set to their task. They were masters of their craft, and they labored long and hard, their skill and secret arts reshaping the ancient necklace to accommodate the divine jewel. The halls echoed with the sound of their hammers, a song of creation that would soon turn to a dirge of war. When their work was complete, the result was beyond all imagination. The beauty of the Nauglamír was magnified beyond measure by the living light of the Silmaril. The gold and gems of the necklace seemed to drink in the holy light and reflect it in 1,000 dazzling colors. All who looked upon it were filled with awe and a deep, covetous desire. The dwarven craftsmen were the first to fall under its spell. They had handled many treasures in their long lives, but never anything like this. The Silmaril awakened in them the ancient lust for beautiful things that lay deep in the heart of their race. They looked upon the necklace no longer as a commission, but as their own creation, the greatest work their people had ever wrought. When Thingol came to claim his prize, the dwarves refused to yield it. They declared that the Nauglamír was the work of their fathers, made for the elf lord Finrod, and that Thingol had no right to it. They claimed that the Silmaril, set within it by their own hands, was their just payment for their labor. Their hearts were now set, and they would not part with it. Thingol's pride, ever his greatest flaw, was stung to the quick. He stood alone amongst them in his deep treasury, surrounded by the short, sturdy figures of the dwarves. He looked down upon them, his heart filled with scorn for what he saw as their base greed. He forgot their skill, their honor, and their fierce nature. In his arrogance, he spoke words of contempt. "How do ye of uncouth race dare to demand aught of me, Elu Thingol, Lord of Beleriand, whose life began by the waters of Quivian, years uncounted ere the fathers of the stunted people awoke. He commanded them to depart from Doriath, unpaid and shamed. This single moment of hubris sealed his fate. The fire of their desire, fanned by the king's insult, erupted into a blaze of wrath. The dwarves, enraged beyond all reason, swarmed him there, deep beneath the earth, surrounded by the treasures he had hoarded. King Thingol, the only elf of the Teleri to have seen the light of the trees of Valinor with his own eyes, was slain. They laid hands on a king, in his own hall, and shed the first blood in a new war. Seizing the Nauglamír, the dwarves fled from Menegroth. But their escape was not clean. The alarm was raised, and the Elves of Doriath, horrified at the murder of their king, rose up in a terrible fury. A running battle began in the passages of the Thousand Caves, and most of the dwarven craftsmen were hunted down and slain as they tried to escape the kingdom. The great necklace was recovered and brought back in sorrow to the grieving Queen Mercillion. But the tragedy was not yet over. 2 of the assassins from Nogrod survived the pursuit. They escaped the borders of Doriath and made their way back to their mountain home, their hearts burning with vengeance and their mouths full of lies. They told their kin not of their own greed or their foul deed, but a version of the tale crafted to incite war. They claimed that the Elven king, in his treachery, had refused to pay them, and had them murdered to steal their work. They painted Thingol as a deceiver and a butcher, and themselves as the sole survivors of a cruel ambush. The Dwarves of Nogrod were filled with a righteous and terrible wrath. The news of the slaughter of their finest craftsmen, at the hands of an Elven king, ignited a firestorm of fury. They mourned their dead and swore oaths of vengeance. They began to forge weapons and polish their armor, preparing to march to war against the kingdom of Doriath. Word of this muster reached their neighbors in the city of Belegost. The dwarves of Belegost were troubled, and they sent messengers to Nogrod, urging caution. They suspected there was more to the tale than was being told, and warned that war against the elves would bring only ruin. But the dwarves of Nogrod were deaf to their counsel, consumed by their grief and lust for revenge. Meanwhile, a great change had come over Doriath. With the death of her beloved Thingol, Queen Mercillion's heart was broken. She was a Maya, an angelic spirit, and her power had long sustained the girdle of Melian, the magical barrier that protected the kingdom from all evil. But now, with her will to remain in Middle-earth gone, the girdle failed. Her power withdrawn, Doriath lay open and vulnerable to its enemies for the first time in countless ages. Melian herself, her purpose in Middle-earth at an end, departed from its shores, returning to the deathless lands of Valinor. She left behind a kingdom now leaderless, unprotected, and on the brink of annihilation. It was then that the host of Nogrod came. An army, grim and determined, crossed the river Gelion and marched unopposed into the ancient woods. They met little resistance from the scattered elves, their goal being the heart of the kingdom, the Thousand Caves of Menegroth, where the treasure they sought, and the people they hated, resided. The Battle of the Thousand Caves was a bitter and bloody affair. Elf and dwarf, once friends and allies, now fought with deadly hatred in the glorious halls that both peoples had helped to build. The elves were valiant, but they were no match for the mail-clad, axe-wielding fury of the dwarven warriors who had come for blood and gold. Menegroth was sacked. The dwarves were victorious, and their vengeance was merciless. They plundered the treasuries, taking not only the Nauglamír, but countless other priceless heirlooms and works of art. A great slaughter was made in the halls of Thingol, and the ancient kingdom of Doriath was laid to ruin. The curse of gold had claimed its greatest prize. Laden with the spoils of the fallen kingdom, the army of Nogrod turned for home. The Lord of Nogrod himself now wore the coveted necklace, the Silmaril blazing on his chest. They believed they had achieved their revenge and reclaimed what was theirs. But the doom of the Silmaril was not yet finished. News of the fall of Doriath and the death of Thingol traveled fast. It reached the distant land of Osiriand, to the green woods where Beren and Luthien now dwelt. Beren, now aged but his spirit still fierce, was horrified to hear of the ruin of his wife's ancestral home. A fire was rekindled in the old warrior. He gathered to him his son, Dior, and a great host of the Green Elves, who were angered by the invasion of their lands by the dwarven army. They laid an ambush at Sarn Atharad, the Ford of Stones, where the dwarves would have to cross the river on their return journey to the mountains. As the dwarves, proud and unwary, began to cross the ford, the elven horns sounded. From the trees, a storm of arrows fell upon them. The ambush was perfect. Caught in the middle of the river, weighed down by their armor and their loot, the dwarves were thrown into chaos. Beren himself led the charge. He sought out the Lord of Nogrod, and there on the banks of the river Askar, they fought a great duel. The Lord of the Dwarves was a mighty warrior, but he could not stand against Beren Erchamion, the man who had faced Morgoth himself. Behrend slew the Lord of Nogrod and reclaimed the Nauglamír with the Silmaril. The dwarven army, leaderless and trapped, was utterly defeated. It is said that very few returned to their mountain homes to tell the tale of their utter disaster. The vengeance of the elves was as complete as the vengeance of the dwarves had been. The rest of the treasure that had been plundered from Doriath was cast into the river, and it was renamed Rathloriel, the Golden Bed. But the necklace, the cause of all this woe, Behrend kept. He brought it back through the forests to his home, and when Luthien wore the Nauglamír, it is said that their home became a vision of Valinor in the mortal lands. The union of the most beautiful of all the children of Ilúvatar with the most beautiful of all jewels was a sight so radiant that the land itself was transfigured. But even this vision of paradise was fleeting, for soon after, Beren and Luthien passed from the world, their strange fate fulfilled. The necklace of the dwarves, now bearing the Silmaril, was passed to their son, Dior Elukil. He took it and went to Doriath, seeking to rebuild the ruined kingdom of his grandfather. But the jewel on his breast was a Silmaril, and the sons of Fëanor still lived, bound by their terrible oath to recover the works of their father, at any cost. The curse was not over. It had merely found a new victim. The echoes of this tragedy remind us that the greatest shadows are often cast by the most brilliant of lights. If this tale of pride and sorrow has stirred the lore seeker within you, subscribe and join our fellowship. Until our paths cross again, may your journeys be safe from the lure of cursed gold.